I'm Richard Mahacek, and I worked at the UC Cooperative Extension in 3 different counties, in Napa County and San Benito County, and for the most of my career in the Merced County office.
And I'm Maxwell Norton, and I worked for 36 years as a farm advisor, specialized in tree fruit and wine grapes and farmland preservation. And I got to spend my entire career right here in Merced County in the Merced office. Well, I was born not far from here in Modesto, California, just up Highway 99. And I grew up in the Modesto area. And I went to schools there, went to Modesto Junior College, Cal State Stanislaus just down the road, and got my BS and MS from Fresno State.
And I grew up in Sonoma County, in a little town of Fulton, just outside of Santa Rosa. And I got to Merced kind of by the long route. Went to junior college in Santa Rosa and San Jose State. And then, while trying to get a job teaching, I happened into a position in Napa County with the 4-H program there. And soon afterwards went to Hollister in San Benito County before getting the position in Merced.
Well, we both heard about a job opening that was in Merced, and we ended up applying for it and interviewing for it, and that's how we met.
Yeah.
He was already working on the staff there, and I was the junior member in 1979.
Yeah, kind of by mistake. I wasn't going to be working for Cooperative Extension. I was going to be a teacher. And because I'd been in 4-H and had connections that way, I ended up getting the position here after being in those other counties. There was 2 or 3 positions actually available at the time when I was applying. I applied for Merced, I applied for Fresno, and fortunately I got the Merced position, and at the time I didn't want to be any farther south. Didn't want to be in Southern California. Well, I soon learned that Merced wasn't Southern California, so that was. I learned about UC Cooperative Extension because my older sister, joined 4-H in about 1954 or 5, and soon after that my mother became a volunteer leader. I was the little brother that kept being dragged along to 4-H meetings and events, and then when I was old enough, at that time 10 years old, I joined 4-H in Sonoma County and went through the program. Again, I was going to be a teacher. I wasn't going to be involved with extension work directly, but because I'd been in 4-H and heard about it, was able to apply for a position in Napa.
I was in 4-H as a kid. My mom was in 4-H and was a 4-H leader. My grandfather was a 4-H leader, so we were a real 4-H family, I guess. And I had taken a course at Modesto Junior College that was taught by a farm advisor who later went on to be in the faculty at UC Riverside on soil evaluation. And so he had told me I should consider cooperative extension as a career. Well, I was finishing up my graduate program. I was a graduate teaching assistant at CSU Fresno. One day I walked into my advisor's office and he just throws a piece of paper in my face and goes, "Here, you like to talk, you'd be good at this." And it was the position announcement for Merced. And I said, "Do you think I'd be qualified?" And he goes, "Qualified as anybody else, you better apply for it." So the rest was history.
In 4-H we work with a lot of volunteers, so coordinating with volunteers and trying to encourage them to conduct programs and to engage young people into the activities that we wanted them to be engaged in and how we wanted them engaged was probably one of the hardest things to do. Many fine volunteers out there, but arranging and coordinating them to follow through in those lines is probably the hardest thing that we had to do for me.
Being a farm advisor, we provided a lot of technical assistance to farmers in our region. And I always knew that if a farmer is farmers calling me up to look at a problem. They've probably already asked a neighbor, they've asked a fertilizer salesman, they've asked a licensed pest control advisor, so it's going to be a good one by the time they call us out. Fortunately, I have the whole UC system to help me out. I've got UC Riverside, UC Berkeley, and UC Davis and the field stations to call. And so, but I had to be very humble and tell them that I'm going to get some more help on this. But it was a lot of fun, but very challenging working on complicated problems.
Another complication of would be the fact that we're such a cooperative program. There was the United States Department of Agriculture, there was land-grant universities, there was county government, and for people to understand how we all work together was sometimes a difficult thing to explain.
I was one of the very few farm advisors in all of the United States, even North America, that got to work with figs, because Merced County was the second largest fig producing county in North America, following behind Madera. And so I did a lot of interesting research on figs, worked on a few problems, and even got to help represent the United States and UC at an international fig conference symposium in Morocco once. Gave a couple papers there and helped chair a couple sessions. So it was a lot of fun getting to know an industry that's very ancient. Before we had a county fair that most of you, I'm sure, have gone to, Merced County, before the county fair, Merced County had a fig and chicken festival. And so that was the grandfather of the county fair in Merced County. And similar scenarios existed in other counties as well. Figs are a Mediterranean crop, and our crops are similar to all the other Mediterranean countries all around the Mediterranean, from northern Africa to Spain to Italy and Greece. And so the crops that you find there are going to find here. And so because they're Mediterranean, they do very well here in the San Joaquin Valley. They don't do well in places that have rain in the summertime, which is...
Well, from the 4-H side of things, because we're working with young people, what I've found, whether you're working with young people from a farm worker community or migrant type of situation or a refugee population, high income, low income, whatever the group is, young people really do want to learn. They want to engage with adults. They want to do things like cooking and canning and sewing and woodworking and raising animals and caring for livestock and plants. Those are all things that no matter what groups we've had, those types of things still seem to interest kids. And it's just working with them on those types of things and encouraging those adults to be positive role models in those kids' lives. Didn't matter who they were, they all seemed to be interested in doing that.
And working with farmers, it's important to remember that the differences are not only cultural, but generational. And so the way I would communicate with somebody who was many, many years older than me, and understanding that they came from a different era of agriculture than I did, was very important. And whereas I got the chance to work with a lot of grandchildren of farmers that I worked with when I started my career, and I, of course, would communicate with them quite differently. And different people have different levels of technology that they're comfortable with, and so you needed to be able to speak to people in a way they can understand and gear the technology level to the level that they're comfortable with, and give them scenarios and examples of things to use. Also, you know, we have a lot of farmers from different cultures, some where English is a second language, and you have to be sensitive to that. and they're going to ask questions in a certain way. Some people are distrustful of the government, no matter what part of the government you are in, and so I try to always be sensitive to that. I had the opportunity of working with the Hmong farmers and some Laotians and some other ones from Southeast Asia, and that was a lot of fun. They really struggled at first to get used to the technology and get used to working and doing business in our society. And many of them started very small farms, that way they could sell their own produce, and you've seen the fruit stands around the county. And so I did some research on strawberries especially, and I worked with these guys for quite a while, dealing with some real basic things like irrigation. The big deal for the Strawberry Board, which funds a lot of organized research in the University of California, is new varieties, replacements for fumigation and things like that. And it was my job to tell them that that's not what our farmers need. They need some real basic stuff like how to not over-irrigate and not over-fertilize, and which I immediately started to recognize that the irrigation, they were putting on too much or too little, and they were over-fertilizing routinely because they figured if a little is good, more is better. And so it took a while for me to get their trust, but did some good projects, and I personally noticed them changing their practices over time as a result of me continually suggesting things and showing them things. And one day I had quite an endorsement from one of the farmers. I go visit him a lot, and one day the lady tried to give me a crate of strawberries as a gift, and I said, no, I can pay for my own strawberries. You know, this is their livelihood. You know, I tend not to accept gifts. And she goes, no, you don't understand. Nobody helps us. You're the only person who have ever helped us. And so that meant a lot.
Yeah, in Merced in the early 1980s, the population of Merced City went from about 2% Asian to about 20% Asian in just a couple of years with the influx of Southeast Asian refugees, mainly Hmong. And I was fortunate enough to be able to be part of a project that was trying to do some outreach to the Hmong communities in the various counties in California. And we were able to hire a 4-H assistant, Pavu Tao. And with Pavu's help, we went out to create 4-H programs in the Hmong communities. Our first efforts in that were actually adult groups learning how to wire up lamps and do some basic activities. Once we got some of those adults involved, we weren't able to get as many adult volunteers as we needed, but they were comfortable enough to allow their children to participate in 4-H groups. And we had a number of groups doing everything from an old project called Sugar Beets, where they raised sugar beets and then got the amount of sugar those beets produced from the local sugar beet companies. But we had a variety of programs with that. A lot of frustrations, as we said, because of the cultural differences. They came from some communities where there was very limited resources. When we had the first couple 4-H clubs, every time they wanted to use their funds that we had helped them create an account at a bank, they would go in and take the money out of the bank to pay for other things. And they would end up taking all the money out and closing the accounts. And we had to convince them that, no, you don't have to take it all out. You can just take a little bit and do those types of things. So there was a lot of cultural things that we had to do. And as Maxwell said, sometimes we would get very good compliments from the parents. And one of those was a few years back, unfortunately at a funeral of one of the members that had been in college and was in a car accident. And the parents got up and Hmong were sharing that 4-H was one of the groups that they allowed their children to go to because they knew it was a safe environment for them and one where there wasn't a lot of bias or other types of things against them that sometimes they would feel in the community.
There's a big processing plant near Atwater called Dole, and before that it was J.R. Wood Inc., and they froze a lot of strawberries, and so they were a ready market for as much as they could produce. The local growers, as much as they could produce, the processor would buy these from them, and they would freeze them. And they'd go to frozen products. And then the strawberries sell very well at roadside markets, and so it was a ready-made product. So they were selling both the roadside market and at the processor, which sometimes brought them in conflict with the processor, because the processor sometimes thought that they were selling the real pretty ones at the roadside market and sending them the number 2s.
We were working with state 4-H program to outreach to migrant farm working families, and we did a variety of things. There was some cutbacks in schools, and summer schools were kind of closed down at that time. Prop 13 in California was part of that. Because of that, we went to labor camps to do 4-H programs. And in Merced County at the time, there were 5 different labor centers that were federally funded labor camps. One in Planada, Merced, Atwater, Livingston, Belico, and Los Banos, I believe. Anyway, those campsites, we were able to go out and start 4-H groups in those summer camps. And over the course of 2 or 3, 4 years, when summer schools came back in, we were able to continue those 4-H groups in the summer programs. We tried to do it as similar to our regular 4-H programs. We did record keeping with them, we did exhibits with them, we arranged with the Merced Fair, which was a little bit later than it is now. Currently it's in the beginning of June. It used to be in the latter part of July, and we would have summer programs with the migrant, and they would get to actually exhibit some of their items at the Merced Fair at that time. And so those were some of the things that we were encouraging and doing at those times.
Most of my contact with farm workers was incidental. In the process of working on farms, I would be in contact quite frequently with farm workers. And by the end of summer, usually my Spanish was pretty good, because I often needed their cooperation, or I needed their help finding people or finding the right place that I was doing my project in.
Yeah, my Spanish never improved. It's still terrible today. I have one little story to share, and this was a group that we had started in the Atwater area, and we were going to do some woodworking activities, and one of the fathers had indicated he would be willing to do that. So I was taking a box of woodworking tools that they could borrow out to their house, and so I drove out there in the county extension car, got the box out, went up to the house to deliver this, and one of the kids came out. And usually the kids could speak English, whether the parents could or couldn't. And so I'm trying to explain what I'm bringing, and you know, telling them and so forth, and then the father, and handing them to them. As I get in the car to leave to drive back to the office, I realized by the end of my conversation, I was talking louder and louder and louder and louder, thinking that if I increased my volume of English, they might understand better. Obviously, that doesn't work that way, but it was kind of an eye-opener for me that it really did happen.
The loud tourist syndrome.
Yeah.
If you yell loud enough, they'll suddenly start understanding. You know, I just remembered something that's really worth mentioning. Before pesticide safety materials were multimedia and available through all kinds of organizations, UC was publishing a lot of what was out there, and pesticide safety stuff that was targeted at farm workers. Yeah. And so UC got a grant, and they did some nice pesticide safety books in English, Spanish, Hmong, Lao, maybe Chinese, because there's a lot of Chinese-speaking farmers and farm workers over in the coastal areas. And so I got asked if I would take one of the key project managers around to different farmers, and I would give them the books. We gave them both English and Hmong or Lao, whatever they wanted. I got them to them, And then later we interviewed them and asked them what was useful. And they said, well, we use the English one mostly. And we said, why? You know, we went to all this work, all this money translating. And they said, well, yeah, we realize, we appreciate that you did that. It was nice. But, you know, all the kids in the family knows, they all know English. And we don't always trust the translations. We're not sure the translations were always spot on. And so we'll have Grandma and Grandpa look at the translations, but the teenagers will double check the facts for us. And so that was an education for me and for the project leader. Well, that is an irrigation lake.
Yeah.
That was built by the predecessor of the Merced Irrigation District, which was called the Crocker-Huffman Company. Mr. Crocker was one of the guys that built the railroad, and Crocker Bank. And so this lake was built for two reasons. One, it regulates water. The water in this lake comes from the Merced River, and it piles up behind it, and there's a big canal that runs to the west and north, and there's a big canal that goes through the campus and heads out towards the LeGrand in that area. And so that was primarily its original use. And then they also at the same time used it as the water supply for the city of Merced. Where the haunted tower is where the water went down into the clay pipes that went into downtown Merced. And that water was distributed all over town. And back then, that was considered a really great supply of water.
And then time-wise, that was 1880s maybe?
Yeah, late 1800s, yeah.
So that water, Merced River, is coming out of Yosemite Valley.
Most cities in the valley gradually went to wells because they didn't have to filter them, didn't have to chlorinate them. As working in Cooperative Extension's core mission is technology transfer. Our job is to take technology that's developed by UC, USDA, CSUs, even private industry, and get it in the hands of the people who can put it to use. And of course, the technology in agriculture has changed immensely, even from when I started my career to when I finished it. We knew nothing about using pheromone traps to study the behavior and phenology life cycles of insects. And during my tenure, we introduced that technology and got it being widely used, and then we also introduced using pheromones as a way to control insects without pesticides, which was huge, which was really huge. First, just for farmers who were close to town and needed to avoid getting complaints, but also for organic farmers. And that was big for organic farmers. And biological control. Farmers knew about it. Having a system to make biological control be useful for both conventional and organic farmers. Cooperative Extension, we're the ones who introduced it. We can pull out old brochures on biological control in different crops that go back to the 1940s. So it's been pretty amazing.
Yeah, in 4-H there's been a lot of changes over the time as well. When it first started out, the farm advisor doing 4-H work, or the home economist doing 4-H work, was doing some of it directly to the young people, either in a school setting or in local communities. And in Merced County, some of the first groups that were doing 4-H included the communities of Dos Palace and Hillmar. But by the 1920s or so, they needed more help to do that. And that's when volunteers came to be encouraged and recruited to help lead those 4-H groups. And by the late 40s and early 50s, community club-based programs really were expanding at that time. And so that's still what we have today as far as how we deliver the bulk of our 4-H programming. But sometimes we'll have special interest groups, we'll have other types of things that will encourage them. As far as projects or subject matter, obviously the first programs were around those that were rural community needs, livestock and animals and canning and clothing types of projects. And those still are popular today. But by the 60s, we started to increase and encourage other types of projects. And during my time as a 4-H advisor in the 1990s and early 2000s, STEM programs were being highlighted throughout the communities and in 4-H. And while science-based programs were all part of cooperative extension 4-H programs all along, we really focused on a variety of new technologies and things. And one of the areas that I focused on was in STEM programming, including the development of national curriculum for 4-H and robotics. And so when we think about 4-H and showing animals at the fair, sometimes we don't know about the small engines or the woodworking or the robotics, rocketry projects, and those types of things that might be a little more technical from the mechanics side of it.
When I started working for the University of California, in your first year or two, like most employees, we all got sent up to UC Berkeley, which was the mothership. So as a new employee back in 1979 and 80, went up to UC Berkeley and had employee orientation. We talked about the mission and who we were as professionals. And I remember them saying, as a member of UC, you're a change agent. And I didn't like that at all. And I said I felt that was government overreach and rather presumptive. And I said, no, I think I'm here to address people's needs. That's what I'm here for. That's why I joined. And they said, over time, you're going to realize that you're a change agent, whether you like it or not, and you'll realize that that mission, that part of your mission is more and more and more important. And looking back all those years, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have been a change agent and to be part of some very positive changes in agriculture. Even from my high school days, I had an interest in the issue of farmland being paved over in California. And the most perfect place in all of the Americas for growing citrus was LA County and Orange County. And we know what it looks like today. The most perfect place on earth probably to grow an apricot or a prune is the Santa Clara Valley, Silicon Valley. We know what that looks like now. There's a few little orchards that are now like little museums over there so people can see what an orchard looked like. And so I had a real interest in farmland preservation and land use policy. And after I was here a few years, I went to my bosses and asked them if I could write that into my program as a small part of my program. And so I worked in the area of farmland preservation for the rest of my career. In the course of all the different things I did, I was asked by local farmers to help them start the Merced County Farmland and Open Space Trust. Simultaneously, there were some other little trusts being formed in the northern San Joaquin Valley. And years later, we got together with those other groups and formed the Central Valley Farmland Trust. And then over time, outside groups started noticing us, and there's a long-standing trust in Brentwood area and the Bay Area next on our side of the Bay Area, and which is real famous for their farming. If you eat fresh corn in the summertime, probably came from Brentwood, and they joined us and then we became the California Farmland Trust. And I'm still on the board. I'm pretty proud of the way University of California has addressed issues in agriculture. We address issues all the way from the most sophisticated down to the most rudimentary. And the technologies that we develop and the answers that we come up with are very useful to farmers of all sizes. And UC has gotten criticized by certain groups over the years that maybe our programs cater too much to big agriculture, corporate agriculture, the ones who can afford things. New technology will always be seized upon by the larger companies in our economy, regardless of agriculture or not, because they're the ones who are in a position to take risks on unproven technologies that haven't been widely adopted yet. But when it comes to the basic science that we do and the types of problems that we address, they're problems that are equally accessible by farmers of all sizes. Now, when it comes to farm policy, I think that debate continues to go on, and I've always felt that farm policy in terms of USDA programs and things that provide direct assistance to farmers should always be geared to the middle-sized farmers. These are the true family farmers, not the tiniest ones, not the biggest ones who can afford their own expertise, but we should be always, because that's the category of business that is always at risk. If you look at the businesses that went out of business during the pandemic, a lot of them were these middle-sized businesses. Those were the first that went out of business and closed their doors. The tiniest ones stayed open because they had such a small economy of scale. The big ones, of course, can shift their costs around. So I think UC has done a good job, and I think we should continue doing research work that is accessible and is applicable and appropriate for as broad a range of the farmers in the state as possible.
In addition, there are some counties and areas that have what are known as small farm advisors, specifically working with those very limited resource farms, families and farms that on that smaller scale. Land and agriculture are going to be around for a long time, but we're going to have we have limited land resources. So another area that sometimes gets looked at is the technology. And in the case of my own children, they're currently working in a vertical agriculture startup. And so agriculture also is going to be moving into areas like this, where they're growing plants indoors with artificial light. In their case, aeroponically, so there's no soil involved. They're doing it with robotics and a variety of other types of things. So while that's not going to replace the land that we have, it's going to supplement and provide resources and hopefully food products in areas where they wouldn't have the availability as convenient or as local as it might be.
History is most important because it allows us to put what's happening around us and put what we are doing today into context. And it helps us to make decisions about whether or not we're going in the right direction, and it helps us make decisions about whether society is moving forward.
I've had an interest, and sometimes it's just personal history, family and genealogy and those types of things. But just looking at, for me, I like the mechanical things. So looking at old farm equipment from the 1800s, how did they start looking at and devising things to help them in production? Growing up, we grew up on a small farm. We had 10 acres. We had very limited resources. So we cut our hay with a horse-drawn hay mower, and we towed it behind a little tractor, and I remember riding in the dump rake to rake up hay. Those are things that most people my era didn't do because they had newer resources. But just understanding the history of how production has changed over time is I think, a critical thing for us to know and understand. In 2017, we had a celebration of the 100 years of cooperative extension in Merced County. And that's, 1917 is when we first had our first farm advisor and so forth assigned to the county and so forth. And so that book's available. There's some written stories in there. Unfortunately, some of those stories are by people that have already passed away. Some were written then by people that have since passed away. But there's some history there if you're looking for some 4-H aspects. So look at that as one of the tools that you might have for the 4-H part of it. The other part is the Extension Office still has a lot of history there that hasn't been documented and recorded. And so those are also other areas that you might explore.